The sky above was burnt orange, and the sun never really set on the planet called Virel. It just dimmed a little, like someone lowering a weak light bulb. Dust blew endlessly across the rocky plains. No trees, no animals, just broken metal, old bones, and sand that never stayed still. It was not a place made for the living. And yet, someone was there. Someone moved across the wasteland, step by slow step. His name was Logan. He was human. One of the few who dared to visit forgotten planets like this one. He wasn't a soldier, not anymore. Not since the war ended. Now he was just a salvager. A wanderer. Someone who picked through the remains of old alien battles and collected anything that could still work or be sold. It was dangerous work, but it paid enough to survive. He wore a long, cracked helmet with a dusty visor and a breathing filter. His backpack rattled with tools. A rusted scanner beeped softly in his hand as he followed a weak energy signal through the wind-blown desert. He didn't expect anything valuable. The signal was faint, probably just an old battery or wrecked drone. But what he found was something else. Half buried in the sand, beneath a piece of twisted metal, was a body. At first, Logan didn't move. He'd seen plenty of corpses on dead planets, some fresh, some nothing but armor and bones. But this one was different. This one was glowing. The body was small, thin, and almost childlike. But it wasn't human. Its skin shimmered silver in the light, cracked in places like dry clay. Long white hair stuck to her face, tangled and dirty. She wasn't wearing armor, just a torn robe and strange markings on her neck. Symbols he couldn't read. He stood there for a long moment, staring down. Was it a trap? Aliens had strange ways. Some set up bait, fake wounded soldiers to lure in curious humans. But this didn't feel like that. She wasn't moving. Her chest was barely rising. Her lips were dry. Her body was shaking. Still alive. Logan knelt slowly, one hand on his sidearm, the other brushing away sand. Her eyes fluttered open. They were bright purple, not natural. Not for any species he knew. And then, very softly, she whispered, "Run." Her voice was broken, weak, but the fear in her eyes wasn't fake. It was deep, like something ancient and hopeless. Then Logan heard it too. A sound, distant, low, mechanical, like a swarm of small engines. Something flying, something scanning. He ducked low beside the alien girl, trying to spot it. Across the horizon, a black dot was moving fast. A drone. Sleek, sharp, and hunting. He could leave. Right now. Slip away. The drone wasn't here for him. But he didn't move. The girl tried to speak again, but her throat was dry. He grabbed a small water pouch from his side and tilted it toward her lips. She drank slowly, trembling. Her eyes never left the sky. "Why are you here?" Logan asked, barely above a whisper. She blinked hard, struggling to speak. "They left me." "Who?" "My kind." Logan's heart kicked harder. She wasn't just some unlucky traveler. She'd been left here on purpose. This was an execution, not an accident. More engines hummed in the distance. Logan made a choice. He pulled her carefully into his arms. She was light, too light, like someone who hadn't eaten in days. He moved fast, keeping low, weaving between boulders and old ship parts. His scanner buzzed with warnings. Heat signatures approaching, air pressure changing. Drones were everywhere now. The girl's glow pulsed gently against his chest. He reached a hidden ridge, behind a rusted hull of a fallen cruiser. Beneath it was a crack in the rock, his shelter. He slid inside, dragging her gently with him. The cave was small, lit only by a flickering lantern. Inside were tools, food packs, a sleeping mat, and a comm unit that hadn't worked in months. But it was safe, for now. He laid her down, covering her with his blanket. Her breathing was shallow, but steadier. Logan checked the entrance, then scanned her body with a medical reader. The results made no sense. Her blood had two energy types. Her cells were splitting and repairing at the same time. She was changing. He sat back, breathing hard. What had he just picked up? Outside, the drone flew by, its blue searchlight sweeping the desert. It stopped, hovered, then moved on. They were safe. Barely. Logan looked at the girl again. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. He leaned closer. "Why? Help me," she whispered. Logan didn't answer for a long time. He could have left. He should have left. He didn't know her, didn't know what she was, or why her people wanted her dead. But something in her eyes, some broken, frightened light, made him stay. "Because I couldn't walk away," he said quietly. She looked at him like no one ever had before, not with gratitude, not with trust, just confusion, as if no one had ever chosen to save her. Logan leaned back against the rock wall, pistol close, eyes on the entrance. He didn't know what would happen next. Maybe the drones would find them. Maybe this girl was dangerous. Maybe he had made a mistake. But somewhere deep down, he didn't think so. Somewhere, he felt the first stirrings of something old, something human, hope. And outside, the wind kept blowing, and the desert waited for the next soul to be tested. But this time, it might have picked the wrong man. The silence in the cave was deep and strange. Logan sat near the entrance, listening to the wind scrape across the rocks outside. Every few minutes, he'd glance over at the alien girl, Zura. She hadn't moved much since he brought her in. Her breathing was slow, but at least she was still breathing. He still didn't understand what she was, who she was, or why her people had abandoned her like that. His scanner had stopped picking up the drones, for now. But he knew they'd return. Something about her mattered, something important enough that they'd send death machines to a dead planet. He couldn't shake that thought. Zura stirred. Her eyes blinked open slowly. That same deep purple glow shimmered faintly in the dim cave light. She looked around like someone waking from a bad dream. She tried to sit up, but winced. "Don't," Logan said softly. "You're still weak." She turned toward him, studying his face. He'd removed his helmet now. His hair was dark and short, skin sunburned from weeks on the surface. His eyes were tired but calm. "You're human," she said. He gave a small nod. "And you're not." There was a moment of silence between them. Not cold, but uncertain. "My name is Zura," she said at last. Her voice was soft, but stronger than before. "I'm Logan." Another pause. "You didn't have to help me." "I know." "Then why?" He sighed and looked at the dusty floor. "Maybe I just got tired of walking away." Zura leaned back against the cave wall. Her body was still shaking slightly. Her skin, smooth like metal but fragile as glass, looked damaged, bruised. There were long faded scars down her arms and one deeper one across her back. Logan noticed something else too. Around her shoulder blades, the skin looked wrong, like something had once been there and had been ripped away. He said nothing, but his eyes spoke. She noticed. "They cut off my wings," she said suddenly, voice flat. Logan blinked. "Wings?" She nodded, slowly. "My kind. We are born with them. Not like birds. More like light. Energy. It lets us fly. It's what makes us complete. Without them, we are broken." He didn't know what to say. This wasn't in any report. He'd heard stories about advanced alien species, some that fed on light, others that could pass through walls. But this, a species with wings of energy. Zura continued, her eyes distant. "They took mine when I was a child. Said I was defective. My glow was different. My blood mixed. They said I would pollute the bloodline." "So they left you here?" Logan asked. "They didn't want to kill me themselves. It's against their law. So they drop us here instead. Let the planet do the killing." Logan felt something sharp twist in his chest. Anger. Sadness. Maybe both. He looked down at his hands. They were calloused, worn from years of survival, but they still worked. They could still help. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "I don't know. Maybe 6 days. Maybe 12. I lost count." He handed her a protein pack. She stared at it like it was a treasure from another world. She took small bites, carefully, as if afraid it might disappear. After she finished, she looked at him again, this time with something like curiosity. "You're not like the others," she said. "What others?" "Humans. I've seen your kind before. Loud, greedy, always taking things. We're not all like that." "I see that now." She paused, then added, "Why did you come to this planet?" "Salvage," Logan said. "Old tech, crashed ships, stuff no one else wants." She smiled faintly. "Like me." He frowned. "You're not junk. Tell that to them." A soft humming sound broke the silence. Logan grabbed his scanner again. The signal was weak, but rising. Something was approaching. Not a drone. Bigger. Slower. Zura felt it too. Her body tensed. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out. Logan caught her before she fell. "They're coming back," she said. "Why? You said they abandoned you." "They did. But if I'm still alive, it's a threat to their system. A failure they need to erase." Logan checked the cave's entrance. The opening was narrow and hidden, but not impossible to find. If something scanned close enough, it would see the heat signatures. The glow from Zura's body didn't help either. "I need to cool the cave," he said. He grabbed a small device from his bag, a field cooler. He placed it near the girl and activated it. A soft hiss filled the space as the temperature dropped slightly, just enough to confuse a thermal scan. Still, it wouldn't last long. "You should leave me," Zura said. He turned toward her sharply. "What?" "You'll die if you stay. They won't stop until they find me." "Then we don't let them." "You don't understand," she said. "They will burn this planet if they have to. One flame to erase a flaw." Logan stared at her. The way she spoke, it wasn't just fear, it was knowledge. She knew exactly what they were capable of. She had seen it. "You're not a flaw," he said. She looked away. "Then what am I?" He walked to the corner of the cave and opened a small box. Inside were a few old medical patches and a data chip. He slid the chip into his scanner and ran it again over her arm. The readings still made no sense. Energy mixed with blood. A nervous system that pulsed with light. And something else. A low hum, almost like a heartbeat, but not hers. "You're something new," he said finally. "Something they don't understand. And what they don't understand, they fear." She said nothing. He sat beside her as the sound outside grew louder. Whatever was coming was getting closer. "Tomorrow," he said, "we move. I know another place. Deeper underground. I've used it before. They won't find us there." "Why are you doing this?" she asked again. "I already told you." "No, not just helping. Why are you risking your life?" "For me." He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the cave wall, the flickering light of the lantern dancing across the rock. "Because I've seen too much," he said quietly. "Too many people left behind. Too many lives thrown away because someone decided they weren't worth saving." He looked at her, his voice firmer now. "I'm tired of walking past the dying." She didn't know what to say. She just nodded and closed her eyes again, breathing slowly. The sound outside grew quieter. Whatever it was, it hadn't found them. Not yet. But the feeling in the air had changed. The silence no longer felt like peace. It felt like waiting. Logan didn't sleep that night. He watched over her like a shadow, knowing that in this cruel corner of the galaxy, kindness wasn't just rare, it was dangerous. And yet, he stayed. Not because she asked him to, not because it made sense, but because something in him refused to walk away. The hours moved slowly in the cave. Outside, the desert remained still, but the tension in the air grew thicker with every passing minute. Logan sat near the entrance, eyes fixed on the scanner in his palm. The blinking light on the device pulsed like a heartbeat, a reminder that something out there was still searching. The signature had changed. It wasn't just drones now. Something larger, heavier, was sweeping through the sands. A ship maybe. A hunter vessel. He glanced over his shoulder. Zura was curled under his blanket, her breath shallow but steady. She hadn't spoken since last night. Her skin shimmered faintly, but not like before. The glow had changed. It now moved slowly through her veins, like molten light. Logan couldn't tell if it was a good sign or something worse. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small energy bar, chewed it slowly, and thought about their next move. The deeper cave she mentioned could be at least a 2-hour walk. Maybe more, depending on how weak she still was. They'd need to move before the sun climbed higher. Heat waves made it harder to hide. The drones used thermal scans, and Zura's strange body was like a walking signal flare. He walked over and gently touched her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open. "Time to go," he said. She sat up slowly, wincing as she moved. He helped her to her feet, and she leaned on him for balance. "You're still burning up," he said quietly. "I feel strange," she murmured. Strange was an understatement. As he helped her out of the shelter and into the daylight, he saw it more clearly. Her body was changing again. Thin lines of light ran down her arms like glowing veins. Her eyes, once soft violet, now had a faint golden ring in them. She looked less broken and more powerful, but fragile too, like glass that could crack at any moment. They moved quickly across the wasteland, keeping low behind rocks and broken debris. Logan's scanner was silent, but that didn't comfort him. If the hunter ship was out there, it was waiting for the right moment to strike. These kinds of enemies didn't rush. They watched. They stalked. Zura's steps were shaky. Every few minutes, she would stop, press her hand to her chest, and breathe deeply. "Something is building inside me," she whispered. "Like what?" he asked. "I don't know. It's like heat, light, pressure. Is it hurting you?" "No, but it feels like it wants out." They didn't speak for a while after that. Eventually, they reached the edge of a dried canyon. Logan pointed to a narrow crevice on the far side. "There," he said. "Inside that crack, there's a tunnel that leads down into the rocks. No scanners work down there. Old mining tech made the stone dense. It's safe." Zura nodded, and they climbed down slowly, the rocky walls pressing close on both sides. As they reached the base of the canyon, Logan's wrist scanner buzzed violently. Multiple signals. Fast. Flying. He looked up and cursed. 3 sleek black drones zipped through the air, slicing across the sky like knives. They didn't scan. They attacked. A blast of blue light struck the rocks near them, sending debris into the air. Logan grabbed Zura and pulled her into the narrow crevice just in time. Another beam scorched the ground behind them. "They found us," he growled. Inside the crack, the tunnel grew darker. Logan clicked on a shoulder light and led her downward, deeper into the earth. The walls were rough, natural stone, untouched for years. Dust hung in the air like memory. He didn't stop until they were far enough that no light from outside reached them. Only then did he let her sit. Zura was shaking, but not from fear. From power. Her hands were glowing now, brighter than before. Lines of golden energy crackled along her arms. Her body trembled as if holding something back. "What's happening to you?" he asked. "I don't know," she said through gritted teeth. "My body, my blood. It's not just mine anymore." She reached out and touched the stone floor. A pulse of light surged into the rock. The stone hissed, then shimmered for a second, like it had been heated from within. Then it cooled. Logan stared. Zura looked at him, frightened. "I think I'm changing." "Into what?" "I was never supposed to live this long," she whispered. They altered me. Half royal, half experiment. They said I was a mistake, a warning to others. They never thought I'd survive. But now, something inside me is waking up. Logan watched her carefully. She didn't look dangerous. But something told him that if she lost control, this whole cave could collapse. He opened his pack and handed her a water pouch. She drank slowly. I can't hide you much longer, he said. They'll come down here eventually. She nodded. Then I need to stop hiding. He gave a bitter smile. That's not exactly a good plan. It's the only one I have. Then something strange happened. Zura stood, not slowly, not weakly. She stood like someone who had just remembered how to breathe. Her glow steadied. The shaking stopped. Her spine straightened. Her eyes met his, not with fear, but with something new. Purpose. They wanted me dead, she said. But I'm not dead. No, Logan said. You're not. Her body lit up briefly, just for a second. The light was blinding. A soft hum filled the cave, and every rock surface seemed to vibrate gently under their feet. Then it stopped, and everything went still again. Outside the cave, above ground, the hunter ship landed silently on the surface. 4 dark figures stepped out, their armor sleek and sharp. Their eyes glowed blue. They spoke no words. One of them knelt in the sand, pressing a finger to the ground. The dirt was still warm. Residual energy remained, the kind only one being could emit. The leader stood, turned to the others, and gave a single nod. She was alive. And they were going to finish what they started. Deep below, Logan loaded his blaster and turned toward Zura. They're coming, he said. I know, she whispered. She closed her eyes, and the cave trembled. Something inside her had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The air inside the cave had changed. It wasn't just cooler, it was heavier, charged with something unseen. Logan could feel it on his skin like tiny sparks brushing against his arms. Every rock, every inch of earth seemed to listen now, as if the planet itself was waiting for something, or someone. Zura sat in silence on a flat stone, her hands open beside her knees. Her eyes were closed. Light danced beneath her skin in slow, measured pulses, as if her body had found a rhythm with the planet's heartbeat. She looked calm, but Logan knew it was the calm before the storm. He had finished sealing off the upper tunnel with a few crude explosive traps. Basic, but enough to delay anything coming after them. It wouldn't stop the hunters, but it might buy time. Time they didn't have. Zura opened her eyes. I feel them, she said quietly. Logan turned. How? She tilted her head, listening to something only she could hear. They're above. Not far. 4 of them, moving together. Efficient. Their minds are cold. He didn't ask how she knew that. He didn't need to. Whatever was changing inside her was beyond scanners and weapons. It was something old. Something living. I've seen their kind before, she whispered. They don't speak unless ordered. They don't stop unless destroyed. And if they get to you, she looked at him, her voice firm. They won't. Logan wasn't a believer in destiny. He was a man of systems, tools, tactics. But standing there, looking at her, he began to feel like something far bigger than either of them had started the moment he found her in the dust. A spark, lit in silence, now growing into fire. The sound came first, not footsteps. Those would have been too easy. It was vibration. Like the hum of something too heavy to move, and yet it moved anyway. The rock under their feet shivered. Then, voices, cold, metallic, distant. Zura stood. Stay back, she said. If they see you, they'll kill you. I know, Logan said, checking his blaster, but I'm not running. She gave him the briefest look, like she wanted to argue, but knew there was no time. She stepped into the center of the cave, eyes fixed on the dark entrance behind them. The hunters arrived like shadows. 4 tall figures stepped into the light. Their armor was jet black, trimmed with red lines. Their helmets had no eyes, no mouths, just smooth surfaces that reflected nothing. Each carried a weapon, humming with soft, deadly energy. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Zura stood alone before them. The glow in her arms brightened. Her silver skin shimmered like metal heated by fire. One of the hunters raised its weapon, but it never got the chance to fire. Zura moved, not fast, but with purpose. She lifted her hand, and from her palm shot a wave of golden energy. It wasn't fire, or light, or plasma. It was something else entirely. Something alive. It hit the first hunter and sent it crashing into the cave wall. Stone cracked. The air pulsed. The other 3 opened fire. Logan ducked behind a stone pillar, yelling her name, but she didn't respond. Her body glowed brighter, her steps graceful yet powerful. The blasts from the hunter's weapons curved around her, bending as if refusing to touch her. The energy in the room shifted again. Logan felt it in his teeth. Zura raised both hands now. Her feet floated slightly above the ground. Another pulse burst from her chest, this one larger, like a shockwave of light. It threw the hunters off their feet. One of them smashed into the ceiling and fell in a heap. Its armor sparked. It didn't get up. But Zura's body was shaking now. The glow was turning white. Too bright. Too fast. "Zura," Logan shouted. "You're burning yourself." She turned toward him, her face pale, lips trembling. I can't hold it. It's too much." Logan ran to her, catching her as she fell forward. Her skin was hot, like touching a furnace. But he didn't let go. He held her tight, grounding her, whispering, "Breathe. Don't fight it. Control it." She gritted her teeth, her whole body trembling violently. Her eyes glowed like stars, but tears streamed down her cheeks. "They put it inside me," she whispered, "to destroy me. But I'm still here." The last remaining hunter stepped forward, aiming its weapon. It was undamaged, untouched, and perfectly still. Logan raised his blaster, but it wasn't enough. Before he could fire, Zura stood straight again. Her hands opened, palms facing outward. Her light surged, not as a weapon this time, but as a shield. The hunter's shot fired. Direct hit. But it vanished. The beam dissolved against the wall of light she had created, like water touching the sun. Zura's voice echoed now, louder, layered, like more than one person was speaking. "I am not your mistake." The light expanded outward like a dome, swallowing the hunter in a single flash. When the glow faded, the creature was gone. All that remained was silence. Zura collapsed into Logan's arms, her breath ragged, her skin dimmer now. Her body was drained, but her face looked free. He carried her back toward the sleeping mat, lowering her gently onto it. Her body was burning up with leftover energy, but she was alive. And she had fought back. "You did it," Logan whispered. Zura looked at him, eyes heavy. "No," she said. "They're just the first. Others will come." "How many?" She closed her eyes. "All of them." Logan didn't move for a while. The cave was full of dust and smoke, but also something new. Hope. Zura, once discarded, was now something her people had never expected. She had survived. She had fought. And she wasn't alone anymore. Outside, far above the surface, a signal was being sent. A message carried across stars. Not of failure, but of warning. The girl they had left to die was still alive. And the human who stood beside her was not walking away. Not this time. Not ever. The cave had turned quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. This silence was thick, heavy with aftermath. Bits of scorched metal lay where the hunters had fallen. The walls still trembled softly from the last shockwave, and dust hung in the air like ash from an invisible fire. Logan moved slowly, sweeping debris aside, checking the edges of the tunnel for cracks. He wasn't sure if the cave would hold much longer, but his eyes kept drifting back to her. Zura lay still on the sleeping mat, her silver skin dimmed, her light nearly gone. She hadn't spoken in almost an hour. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. Her face, once etched with fear and exhaustion, now held something new. Peace, maybe, or something like it. Logan sat nearby, watching her, unsure what to do next. He had never seen anything like what she did. Not in any war, not on any planet. That pulse of light had destroyed armored enemies without even touching them. It had bent beams, stopped bullets, and turned death into dust. And yet, it had drained her to the edge of collapse. He kept thinking about her words. They put it inside me, to destroy me. But it didn't destroy her. It had become part of her. And now she was changing, becoming something else, something powerful. As if sensing his thoughts, Zura stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, and this time, there was more color in them, no longer just violet, but a warm flicker of gold beneath the surface. "You're still here," she whispered. "Where else would I be?" A soft smile touched her lips. They always said humans run when things get hard. Logan shook his head. "You've been talking to the wrong humans." Zura tried to sit up, but her limbs were weak. He helped her gently, placing a water pouch in her hand. She sipped it carefully, her hands shaking. "We can't stay here," she said. "They'll send more." "I know," Logan replied, "but we can't outrun them forever. There's a place I didn't tell you before." He looked at her curiously. "What place?" She closed her eyes for a moment, like searching through a memory. "When I was young, before they took me away, I saw it in a vision. A place buried beneath this planet. Not made by my kind, but much older. It called to me. It still does. An ancient site." She nodded. "More than that. A core, a pulse beneath the planet. Something that breathes, like me." He hesitated. "Why didn't you say anything before?" "I wasn't strong enough to reach it. But now, after what happened, I can feel it again. It's waking up, and it's waiting for me." Logan stood, thinking. If this place is real, it could be a trap. It could also be the only chance we have. He nodded slowly. "Then we find it." With Zura barely able to walk, Logan strapped together a small hover platform using broken scavenger gear. He placed her gently on it, wrapping her in a thermal cloak, then pushed the platform forward through the narrow tunnels. The path was long and uneven, but Logan's steps were steady. He trusted her now, even when nothing else made sense. They moved through deep caverns, across jagged terrain lit only by flickering lights. Zura guided him with soft whispers, sometimes stopping to feel the walls, sometimes pausing to listen to the distant hum in the earth. Hours passed. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. The rock changed, too. Dark green in color, covered in patterns that shimmered like frost when light touched them. Finally, they'd reached a large chamber. It wasn't natural. The walls were perfectly smooth, curving into a dome shape. The floor was made of metal, not the kind forged by machines, but something older, grown from the stone itself. At the center of the room stood a massive structure, a spire of black crystal, floating inches above the ground, rotating slowly in the air. Zura breathed deeply, her eyes wide. "This is it." Logan stared. "What is this place?" She slid off the platform, legs shaking, and walked toward the spire. As she got closer, it began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter. Lines of golden light stretched across the chamber, connecting the floor, the walls, the ceiling, as if the entire room were a living circuit. She reached out, hesitating for a second, then placed her hand on the crystal. It didn't shatter her. It didn't burn. It welcomed her. The spire pulsed, sending waves of light across the chamber. Strange symbols appeared along the walls, moving like water, alive and shifting. Logan stepped back, shielding his eyes. Zura's body lit up too, lines of light running down her arms, into her chest, her legs, her eyes. But this time, there was no pain, no trembling, only stillness. Then a voice echoed through the chamber. Not a voice of sound, but a voice of feeling. She has returned. The vessel is whole. The seed survives. Logan looked around, stunned. Who said that? Zura didn't answer. She stood still, her eyes wide, breathing deeply. The voice came again, inside both their minds. She is the bridge between light and flesh, born of two truths, rejected by both, but chosen by the core. The crystal's glow faded slightly, then grew calm, like a beating heart slowing to rest. Zura turned to Logan, tears in her eyes. This place, it wasn't made by my kind. It was made for me. You mean, this was planned? Not by them, by something older, a species long gone. They saw the future and made this core as a safe place, a place to awaken those who were born different. Logan looked around, unsure if he should feel amazed or terrified. Then what are you? Zura walked toward him, stronger now, her feet light but sure. I'm not just a mistake. I'm proof that change is coming. She looked down at her hands. The glow had settled inside her, no longer bursting outward. It was part of her now, gentle, controlled. This core bonded with me, she said softly. And now, I can feel its memory. She turned toward the far wall, where a new passage had opened, one not there before. We're not alone, she said. There are others, like me, lost, hiding, waiting. You want to find them. She nodded, and protect them, like you protected me. Logan stepped forward, his voice low. Then we'll do it together. Zura looked at him, really looked at him, and smiled. Together, she said. But far above, in the cold silence of space, a fleet moved toward Varel. Dark ships with cold hearts, carriers, destroyers, and something else, something worse. The elders had learned the truth. The girl they had left to die had survived. And now she had awakened a force they had buried long ago. This time, they would not just erase her. They would burn the entire planet, unless she stopped them first. The wind above the surface had changed. Where once it blew dry and empty across the broken sands of Varel, now it carried the hum of engines, massive ones, silent and heavy, belonging to machines that had not touched ground in centuries. From the dark skies above, the ships descended without sound, sleek, sharp, merciless. They did not announce their arrival. They simply hovered like executioners waiting for the guilty to breathe their last. Logan stood at the mouth of the tunnel leading into the crystal chamber, looking up through a crack in the rock. He didn't need a scanner to know they had arrived. He could feel it. The pressure in the air, the weight of something cruel pressing against the planet like a boot on a fragile shell. Behind him, Zura sat cross-legged on the glowing floor of the chamber, surrounded by lines of golden light pulsing slowly like veins. Her eyes were closed, but her mind was awake, listening, searching, preparing. The ancient spire in the middle of the room now stood still, bonded to her energy, waiting for her command. They're here, Logan said without turning. I know, Zura replied, her voice calm. They brought a full fleet. They're afraid. Should we be? Zura opened her eyes. No. There was no fear in her voice now. No hesitation. Something had changed since the core accepted her. She still looked like the girl Logan had rescued. Silver skin, glowing lines, but there was something in her gaze now that had not been there before. Purpose. Zura stood slowly and stepped toward him. They won't come alone. They'll send the enforcers first. What kind of weapons do they have? Not weapons, she said softly. People. Logan frowned. You mean soldiers? I mean my sister. The words hit him like a shockwave. Sister, she's not like me, Zura said. She's perfect in their eyes. Strong, obedient, cruel. She does what they say without question. Logan clenched his fists. And they sent her here to kill you. Zura nodded. She'll try. He paused. Can you beat her? Zura didn't answer. But she didn't have to. The ground trembled suddenly. A long, slow rumble like something heavy stepping down. Logan grabbed his blaster and moved toward the edge of the cave. Outside, through a narrow opening in the rocks, he saw the dust swirl and the light shift. Figures appeared, tall, armored, and marching in unison. Then one figure stopped. It was taller than the others. The armor sleeker, thinner, deadly. Unlike the others, this one had no helmet. Her face was smooth and pale, with lines of blue markings across her cheeks and forehead. Her eyes were cold silver, like Zura's, but without warmth. Zura stepped beside Logan and saw her. The two sisters locked eyes across the distance. They didn't speak. Not yet. Then the silver-eyed warrior raised her hand. And the others charged. Logan fired first, sending a shot into the shoulder of one of the enforcers. It dropped, armor sparking. But the others moved too fast, leaping across the rocks with inhuman speed. Zura didn't wait. She lifted both hands, and golden light erupted from her palms, forming a curved shield of energy around the entrance. Blasts struck the shield, bouncing off in flashes of white and blue. The energy shook her arms, but she held firm. They'll try to break the barrier, she said through clenched teeth. What do we do? She turned to him, her voice steady. We stop them here. Logan took position by the side wall, firing through small gaps in the stone. One enforcer fell, then another. But the rest kept coming, clawing at the shield like animals, their eyes filled with rage. And then the sister stepped forward. She raised her arm slowly, then brought it down like a hammer. A beam of ice-blue energy smashed into the shield. It cracked, then shattered in pieces. Zura stumbled back, breath hitched. The light around her flickered. Her sister walked forward, calm and sure. Still weak, the sister said coldly. Zura stood tall, still alive. That ends now. They circled one another. Logan didn't move. He could tell this fight was not for him. Zura's hands lit again, but her sister moved first, faster than thought. A punch to the gut, a kick to the knee. Zura fell, but rolled quickly, sending a pulse of energy into the ground. The blast lifted the sister off her feet, but she landed gracefully. You learn tricks, the sister said, eyes narrowing. But tricks won't save you. Zura rose slowly. I don't need to be saved. Their battle lit up the chamber. Energy against speed, light against cold precision. Every strike echoed with power. Logan could barely follow it. The ground cracked. The walls burned. The air sang with heat. Then the sister grabbed Zura by the throat and lifted her. You were a mistake, she hissed. A stain. You were never supposed to exist. Zura's eyes glowed brighter. I existed anyway. A burst of golden fire exploded from her chest, throwing the sister across the chamber. She slammed into the wall, armor cracked, stunned. Zura fell to her knees, coughing, her body shaking. Logan rushed to her. Zura. She grabbed his arm, trying to stand. The sister rose slowly, bleeding now, eyes wide with something new. Fear. Zura stood, barely holding herself up. You were born to follow, she said. I was born to change everything. The sister's face twisted. They'll burn this planet to ash. You think this is over. It's just beginning. Zura's voice was soft, but unshaken. Then let it begin. The chamber pulsed again. The spire behind them rose higher, glowing brighter, sending waves of energy upward, toward the sky. Far above, the fleet's scanners flashed red. Something below had awakened. Something ancient. Something powerful. And at the center of it all stood one girl who had been left to die, but who refused to stay dead. The sky above Virel turned black. Not because of nightfall, but because the ships had arrived. From the upper atmosphere to the dusty surface, the air filled with the silent roar of machines. Giant shadow ships hovered just above the horizon. Their sharp bodies blocked out the light. Hundreds of them. Cold. Watching. Waiting. The alien empire had sent everything. Not just to destroy Zura, but to make sure the world she touched was erased. Inside the ancient chamber deep below the surface, Zura stood before the glowing spire, her silver skin cracked with light, her eyes burning with something greater than fear. She had survived death, survived exile, survived her sister. But now came the final test. Logan stood beside her, sweat clinging to his brow. The heat in the chamber was rising with every passing moment. The energy pulsing through the walls had begun to hum so loudly that it vibrated inside their bones. The spire wasn't just reacting to Zura, it was preparing something. Something large. Something alive. "We don't have much time," Logan said. "I know," Zura replied, her voice calm. Her sister lay unconscious on the edge of the chamber. Not dead. Zura hadn't killed her. She could have, but she didn't. She had made her choice. "I don't want to destroy them," Zura whispered. Logan looked at her. "Then what do you want?" "I want them to see, to understand, to stop fearing what they created." He nodded slowly, uncertain, but trusting her all the same. Outside, the ships moved into attack formation. Inside, Zura stepped forward, placing both hands on the core. The light from the spire climbed up her arms, wrapping around her chest, her neck, her face. Not burning, bonding. The chamber lit like a sun rising underground. Her feet lifted gently from the ground. She began to glow, not in sharp flashes, but in a steady, soft golden light. Like a second sun, her voice echoed, not with volume, but with meaning. "Core, listen." A wave of energy burst from her chest. "Do not strike. Do not burn. Do not end." The walls shook, the ceiling cracked. But the energy held steady. "Send my voice to them. Show them what they feared." Above the planet, inside the largest ship, the High Command watched their screens in silence. Their scanners blinked wildly. Words began appearing on every console. Symbols, visions, ancient languages they hadn't seen in generations. Images of Zura appeared. As a child, in pain, in exile, then rising, growing, becoming. They watched as her light spread through the planet's crust, like veins of fire, not consuming, transforming. "What is she doing?" one of the commanders asked. Another voice, older, raspier, answered, "She is connecting to us." And in that moment, across the fleet, something impossible happened. Every soldier, every commander, every being tied to the Empire, heard her. Not with ears, with their hearts. They saw her memories, felt her pain, understood her choices, and most terrifying of all, they saw her mercy. How she had the power to destroy, and chose not to. Back underground, Logan stared at her in awe. "You're speaking to all of them," he whispered. Zura nodded, eyes closed. "I'm not just fighting to live," she said. "I'm asking them to change." And above, the ships began to shift. Weapons powered down, engines silenced. Inside the lead vessel, the eldest of the council stood from his seat and removed his war seal. "She was the one," he said. "The seed we buried, the light we feared." A long silence passed. Then he whispered, "We were wrong." And across the sky, the ships began to rise. Not in attack, but in retreat. They left the atmosphere slowly, as if unsure of the choice. But they left. Not one shot fired. Not one city burned. Just silence. Surrender. And something deeper. Understanding. Back in the chamber, the light dimmed. Zura collapsed, her body drained, but not broken. Logan caught her before she hit the ground, lowering her gently. "You did it," he said. She opened her eyes weakly. No, we did. He smiled. In the distance, the ancient walls of the chamber began to glow again, but not in defense. They pulsed in welcome. The planet, once used for death and exile, was now reborn. Not a graveyard, but a beginning. A new beginning. Zura turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. I'm not the only one. There are others out there, like me, lost, scared, waiting. Then we find them, Logan said. Her lips curled into the softest smile. And what will we call this new world? He looked around the chamber, at the glowing stone and ancient machines that had waited for centuries just for her. Home, he said. Zura closed her eyes, finally allowing herself to rest. Above, the stars returned to the sky. The shadows were gone. The girl they had left to die had become a symbol, and the human who refused to walk away. He had changed the galaxy just by choosing to stay. Together, they had ended a war before it began. Together, they had rewritten the future, and somewhere in the quiet space between stars, a new light began to rise. Not just in one girl, but in all of them. Forever.